topic will be microscopy. So, Malvika, take it away.
Okay, so before I start, so there's a lot of physics involved in microscopy. So how many of you have actually used microscopes? Almost, I know Thorn has. Okay. Uh, how many of you have actually used microscopes? Oh, almost everyone. So do you think you want to use it after the class, or we have a couple of microscopes, so if you want you can always play. I know Janelle has last semester with me, Maymester. Thorn has, I don't know, Vanessa, I think you're going to use it very soon, if not now. But so a lot of microscopy involves physics and the theories, which if you don't understand, don't worry about it, because even I don't understand it completely. I know how to use a microscope, I know how to process data and everything, but there's a lot of things apart from that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So today I'm going to mainly talk about different kind of microscopes that are used, a little bit on history and how are the principles, how are they little different from each other, how are the outputs, a little bit on electron microscope. I'm really scared about the principles of electron microscopes. They are really dense, but how different are electron microscopes from the normal ones that we use. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and I might not talk about all the slides that I have given here. They have 58 slides, but not necessarily I'm going to talk about everything. So let's start and see how it goes. And towards the end of the lecture, I have picked out 5 quizzes online. So there are like tons of quizzes on microscopy online. So if you solve them, at least you'll have a basic idea on how to use and what kind of care you should take towards microscope, something like that. Okay. So microscope, what is a microscope? So this is a definition I have picked directly from the internet. It's an instrument used for viewing very small objects such as mineral samples and animal or plant cells. And why do we want to see that? Because we want to see it very magnified. We want to study them in detail about their structure and morphology. So the history of microscope goes back to 1600s, where Antony van Leeuwenhoek was the first person to actually see cells under the like living cells under the microscope. He was the first one. On right, you can see another microscope by Robert Hooke. He was the one to first, how do I say, assemble the actual microscope. If you see, it's like a very, very old pattern of scopes. From that, we have evolved a lot till this date. And it is an optical instrument, which I have already said. It consists of lens, a combination of lenses for making enlarged or magnified image of a minute object. And how it works: microscope uses lenses to bend and focus light rays to produce enlarged image of small objects. There are mainly 2 groups based on the type of illumination that is used. One is light and other one is electron microscopes. So light microscope uses sunlight or artificial light to see the objects. Under light microscope we have bright field, dark field, phase contrast, fluorescence. So these are the 4 basic kind of light microscope. Based on this light microscope, there has been a lot of improvisation. They have come up with a lot of new technology and different kind of things. And under electron microscope, there's use of electron to see your sample. So you have 2 basic kind of electron microscope, one being transmission, other being scanning. Coming to light microscope, this is the most common type that we use, and all of you, I'm sure you are already using or you're going to use. So they are of most importance to study microorganisms, because I study C. elegans, Natalia, she studies cells, so both of us, we can tell how robust scopes are and how useful it is for our studies. We cannot survive without one. So and they are the simplest of all microscopes, and they use this lens. It's the same kind of principle that is used, that use focus light rays to produce enlarged image. And types is bright field, as I've already told, dark field, phase, and fluorescent. And how does this microscope work? So the light is first transmitted and focused by a mirror and a condenser. So I'll show you part by part what are the different parts of a scope. And this focus light illuminates the object or specimen. And this reflected light is collected by an object where primary image of an object is formed. And it is actually the real or inverted enlarged image of the object that you see under your when you see under your eyepieces. And this eyepiece helps in further magnification of the primary image. So the main application is observation of morphology. You can detect cell structure, You can do motility. You can see blood smears. It's extensively used in forensics and all that. And the useful magnification of light microscope, that's one of the problem is the resolution, because what you see under the scope, it not be very well resolved, because the resolution is limited by the wavelength of the illuminating beam. And it's an ordinary scope. It forms dark image against light background. And as you must have already seen it, it consists of a study metal body or a stand, and a base and an arm, and there's a light source which is usually in the base of the scope, and there are two focusing knobs. So this is a basic structure of a microscope, and there is a stage on which you can place your slide with your samples. And there is a substage condenser which is mounted beneath the stage and focuses a cone of light. So this is a very intricate details of a general microscope. And the curved upper arm whole body assembly with nose piece and ocular lens eyepiece attached. Nose piece holds 3 or 5 objective lenses. So if you see there's a nose piece, and you'll have different kind of lenses. One will say 1x, 2x, 4x, 5x. So according to how much magnification you need, you can just move that scope. You can play with it if you want in your lab. So this is the conventional microscope that we all have in different forms in our lab. So this is the eyepiece, this is the tube, this is the coarse focus, this is a fine focus, this is a nose piece and objectives. I know we have seen it so many times, but I'm sure a lot of us, we don't know about the technical names and the details of that. Even I didn't know a lot of names. And this is the diaphragm and mirror. And this is how the image is formed. So this is the eyepiece through which you see, and this is the source of light. And this is the stage where you place your specimen. And if you see how the light hits the specimen, it forms a primary image. And through this eyepiece, this primary image is like magnified. So this is like a very basic thing of the microscope. And the image is created by the objective and lenses working together. So both of them are so important. Light from illuminated specimen is focused by the object, creating a large image that I have already told. The ocular lens further modifies the primary image. So the last point is very, very important for you to know. So how do you calculate total magnification using your normal light microscope? It is always multiplied by the magnification of objective by the magnification of the eyepiece. Something very, very important. Because students come to me and say, I have only 20x. I said, what is your eyepiece objective? Because they can't say that, because that's very important for you to know. Out of all this, last sentence is the most important for you to know. And this is the image that is formed by bright field microscope. This is a small worm in our lab, and this is exactly how you see it. And advantage is that you use it to view live and immobile specimens like bacteria, cells, tissues, and of course worms too. And we can use it to observe mobile stuff too. And for transparent and color, however, for transparent or colorless specimen, it is important that they be stained first. So it's a very good example is gram staining, where you can stain things and see under a light microscope. For something which is very transparent, you need to use an external dye or something. Okay, so coming to dark field microscope allows viewer to observe living unstained cells and organisms simply by changing the way they illuminate the object. So there's a hollow cone of light focused on a specimen in such a way that unreflected and unrefracted rays do not enter the objective. So only the light that has been reflected. In case of dark field microscope, there is no light source below that. So there is a light which the specimen emits. So based on that reflection or refraction of the specimen, an image is formed. And the field surrounding specimen appears dark while the objective is brightly illuminated. So it is very much used. I have never used a dark field microscope, but it can reveal considerable internal structure in larger eukaryotic microorganisms. So this is how it forms. It's like there's no light, so it works by illuminating with the sample with the light which will not be collected. So there is a light source, but it is not collected by the objective lens, and it will not form a part. So there is no primary and secondary image. There is only one image that is formed through this. It is well suited for uses involving live and unstained biological samples like smear from a tissue culture or individual waterborne or single-celled organisms. But one limitation of dark field is that dust and other particles can also interfere in that. So sometimes because of the lack of primary image, you can't differentiate between what is an organism and what is a dust or a hair or some fiber kind of particle. So that's another thing. So moving on to the next one, which is the phase contrast microscopy. So so what happens here, there is a small phase shift in the light passing through the transparent specimen and converted into amplitude or contrast change in the, so mostly you get like a black and white image. It's not a black and white, but that's what happens. So there are two phases. So there are two phase plates. The light actually hits the specimen and it goes through two phases, and so there is a separation between the illuminating background light from the specimen and the scattered light, which makes up the foreground details, and you have to manipulate these phase plates. So one good thing about this generation microscope is that you don't have to do anything. The scope does everything for you. You just have to know how to use your specimens, how to mount your specimens. You don't have to manipulate anything in this world anymore, not even confocals. These are the new generation stuff. So that makes our life much, much easier, that you don't have to manually manipulate a lot of things. Well, there are negative things to that too, but especially for phase contrast, I'm so glad that I don't have to manipulate anything. It's like, I can show you some of the images that we have taken through phase contrast. One of the major advantages of phase contrast is that there is no manipulation. Even the living cells can be examined. I'm sure it's used for the cell cultures and all too. It's very popularly used for cell cultures, and without being previously killed, fixed or stained. And it's mostly commonly used to provide contrast of transparent specimens like living cells and even C. elegans. You can see each cells in the worm with phase contrast. You can see all the eggs, you can see pharynx. It's very beautiful with that, without any, how do I say, it's just a very simple and inexpensive way to view your sample. And of course, it's useful in observing cell cultured in vitro during mitosis. So you can see the cell motility and everything with this scope. So this is one example of how a phase contrast would look like. It's a little overexposed, but yeah, so little bit, not eggs, but the intestine is. A little bit of pharynx, if you see this one. Yeah, it should be a little less exposed, to be honest. So phase contrast is very useful when your sample is detected through fluorescence. And if your fluorescence is a parameter to determine the effect of treatment on your cells or organism, if the fluorescence is missing, or it's very useful in those things. Okay, so this is the most popular one. This is what we are interested in always, fluorescent microscopy. So in all types of microscope, cells constituents are not distinguishable, all those staining does, but not totally. In this microscope, various fluorescent dyes are used, which gives property of fluorescence to only specific part of the cell, and hence it can be focused. So the discovery of fluorescent microscope has like revolutionized how molecular biology works, because we are able to create different constructs using different fluorescent dyes, like fluorescent stuff like GFP or YFP, and we are able to express those to our protein or gene of interest and visualize that. So it's a big revolution, I think, the discovery of fluorescent microscope. So what is the main principle? So when certain compounds are illuminated with high energy light, they then emit light of a different lower frequency. This is known as fluorescence. Often specimens show their own characteristic autofluorescent image based on their chemical makeup. So if you see, there are two kind of spectra. One is absorption and emission. So once the absorption happens from a molecule, it transfers energy to a near molecule, and that emission that goes as an emission spectrum, and you can see that bright glowing light in form of fluorescence. And many different fluorescent dyes can be used to stain different structures of chemical compound. One particular that I think Thorne is already doing, powerful method, is combination of antibodies coupled with fluorochrome. It's such a great technique, like a couple of people are doing in our lab. Examples of using fluorescein or rhodamine, and you might tell, and it's a very popular technique of immunohistochemistry. So if anyone wants to know how to do that and all, you should come to our lab. There are a couple of people who are doing it almost regularly. Yeah. So, and this is a traditional fluorescent microscope. I think this is one of the Axio words that is across the street. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people know there is a very good confocal scope across the street. It's a small area. I think it's opposite to blast office. You have to just walk through, and it just looks like this. So this is one of the first generation fluorescent microscopes. But the ones that I'm going to show you today, and you must have used in our lab, they are so easy to use. There's no like manual maneuvering. You just plug in and play. It's just that easy. So a component of interest in the specimen is specifically labeled with a fluorescent molecule called as fluorophore. So one of the greatest example of fluorophore is a GFP, a green fluorescent protein. So this protein was isolated from a jellyfish, and it's so popularly used as a fluorophore. And this specimen is illuminated with a light of specific wavelength which is absorbed by the fluorophore, causing them to emit longer, which I've already told. So one most important thing is that typical component of a fluorescent microscope are the light source, which could be a xenon or a mercury lamp, the excitation filter or dichroic mirror, and emission filter. So when you start using microscope, you will hear repeated request to you that please turn off the microscope as soon as you are done. Don't leave the lamp on. So that's one of the reason is the xenon or mercury lamp. In other cases, like in confocal scopes, you have argon lasers and all, which you should never leave it on because they cost like couple of $1,000s. I mean, the xenon and mercury lamp, and you don't want to ruin that by just wasting it. So there you'll see warning signs everywhere that please turn off the scope after you use it. So never ever forget to turn off your lamps once you are done. Lamps or lasers in this case. Okay, and the use of emission filter is that the light that is separated from much weaker emitted fluorescence, it's separated through the emission filter, and then it's a very robust technique in which a single fluorophore is imaged at a time, and multicolor images of several fluorophore you can take, so you can have more than one fluorophore in a particular system, model system or a gene, and you can take different images through different wavelength of light, and then you can combine that into a single image. So this is a general one, which is detector and excitation filters and all that. So this is one example of a cell. It's a typical cells that I have seen imaging, so different kind of, I think these are muscle cells if I'm not wrong. I have just picked it from the internet. So you can see different fluorophores here. There is a green, there is a red rhodamen, and there is a blue staining as well. So they have taken, so this is an individual image, but they are superimposed on each other. And this is the worms that we image using the fluorescence. So this is a protein, and these are some of the neurons that I have imaged using the same scope. And applications, it's a critical tool. It's very essential for our degrees, of course. It's a very essential for academic and pharmaceutical research. It's a boon in many ways, and the applications are endless. You can do so many things using fluorophores, creating construct, expression, and then imaging them. You can do endless things with that. An electron microscope, this is something which is very, very, so we have one electron microscope on campus. I don't know if there's more than one. There's only one at chemistry department, if I'm not wrong. I have never got a chance to play with it. So there's a difference the way these scopes work, and it uses a particle or a beam of electron to illuminate. So as of now, whatever we have learned in last 20 minutes, they use different sources of light. It could be a normal sunlight, or it could be an artificial light. In this case, in place of light, it uses electron to create an image. And definitely electron microscopes are much, much expensive toys. So I think the accesses are very restricted, and of course the resolution they create is like, it's beyond like what a normal scope or even a fluorescent microscope can. And electron microscopes are mostly used by the mining engineers on campus. I know the mining engineers use a lot to see the different kind of metals and different kind of things in the compound that they excavate and all that, and it's very popular archaeological stuff also as well. If you see forensic files, you'll see a lot of use of electron microscopes in that. And it was invented by Germans, Max Knoll and Röskinen in 31. And they have much more great resolving power than any other microscope. They can be used to study topography, morphology, composition, and crystallography. Like most importantly, DNA crystallography or something like that for those kind of high resolution images. And this image looks really very, very intricate to me, very, very complex to me than any other. Like it has a condenser, high voltage, it has an electron gun and stuff like that. And essentially this kind of scopes use two kind of guns. One is thermo-ionic emission gun and field emission gun. And so there are interaction of different metals that happens in the scope. One is tungsten, lanthanum, so it's like very, very complex. And there is a field emission, I think, if I'm not wrong, yeah, there is an electromagnetic lens that is used to produce electromagnetic field for focusing and deflection of the electrons. And there is a strong magnetic field which is created by passing a current, and it's totally physics. And there is a condenser lens, there is a second condenser lens, just talks about different lenses and projector lenses. So coming to this is the most important is there are two type of electron microscope. Transmission electron microscope, so it's carried out in vacuum, and this, like if you see the source of the potential is like, it's huge, the potential of that thing. And okay, this is the something all different kind of physics terms. So what kind of images are created using TEM, and what is the resolution power? If you see the good resolution power, it can go up to 0.2 to 0.3 nanometer. So I think even a small dust it can pick up and magnify as this big picture maybe. So that's very cool. And this is a scanning electron microscope. In only difference between scanning and transmission is that it's not used, in this case electrons are not used directly to image the specimen, but it is used to excite it in such a way that it gives out secondary electrons which are collected by detector and view. So there are primary electrons and secondary electrons, which adds another level of complexity. So it's just different kind of ways that it works. So one thing I talked to some students a few months back when they used electron microscope. I asked them what is the main difference between electron microscope and the microscopes that we use here. I mean, they said maybe the functionality wise there is a lot of difference, but the most crucial step of electron microscope is the sample preparation. Because if the sample preparation goes wrong, you can't do anything. Because in our case it's quite easy. I think sample preparation is just we mount them, we fix them with stains or paraformaldehyde or whatever, but it's that's a very intricate step. So the specimen is required to be completely dry. There shouldn't be any moisture, which doesn't happen in our case. Chemical fixation is required to preserve and stabilize the structure of the specimen, and they use glutaraldehyde to cross-link proteins and different kind of stains for the lipid membranes. And the most important thing for TEM is that they dehydrate the entire sample, so they don't want any water in the sample. And also air drying causes collapse and shrinkage is commonly achieved, so they have different kind of protocols for that. And they use different kind of resins to embed their samples and make thin sections out of that. And sectioning is also very important. If you see, they use an ultra microtome. That is something I've never heard. I've heard of vibrotome and all that, ultra microtome, and see the slices that they make, 60 to 90. So Thorn, can you tell us how much, like, what is your slice size? 30.
So it's even thinner than that, but it has to be stained in order to be seen.
Yeah.
But even that is thinner than mice, because I would put the grain was not good.
Okay, so you have thinner slices than this. You have thinner slices.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's why I'm like, this is quite thin for me. I'm like,
Until they're stained, you can't see it if it's less than 80.
yeah, but so and they use different kind of stains, which is they have not given a very good thing about the biological, because we mostly rely on fluorescent and confocal for our biological activity. And for SEM 2, it's like mostly they use specimen to be dry, and they have to use glutaraldehyde with different kind of solutions, and they have to fix the tissue in organic solvent, and dry specimen is mounted and sputtered with coated with gold. I never knew all this. Gold has a high atomic number, and sputter coating with gold produces high topographic contrast and resolution. And that's about it. I have 5 quizzes. I don't know when do you want to do it. Do you want to do it now? I think they're very short quizzes, and they don't give you answer if you pass, or I don't know. I have not done any of that, but you can try doing some of the quizzes. But I found them a little interesting. I mean, I saw like 20 quizzes. Out of that, I found that